All right, so to honor time, it is 4:03. So let's go ahead and get started. So you guys are here for specially designed instruction. What, where, when, and how. So Matt, if you'll go to the next slide. So my name is Katie Mosley, and I work for the Indiana Technical, I'm sorry, we just changed our name, and I still struggle remembering the IEP Technical Assistance Center. I'm a specialist with the center. I come from 19 years teaching general education English in an inclusion setting. And we also have Alana presenting today. I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi, I'm a special education teacher as my background and an IEP coordinator. Also, I went to IU in Bloomington. I'm sad they lost yesterday. You guys, if you want to ask us questions or comments, please use the chat. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. But I am the special education. That's my background, co-teaching and self-contained. So that's so nice to meet you guys. And Matt is the other person that's going to help us today.
Hi, my name is Matt Johnson. My background's also as a special educator. Let's see, been working for the Resource Center in different formats for the last about 17 years. And I graduated from Purdue University, so we always have that nice fun rivalry going as we go through this. And we're all, at this point, all sad with NCAA losses, but the girls teams are looking pretty good. So I guess we'll take
minus IU.
Yeah, they did pretty good though, so looked good. So anyway, they were in it this year, so that some years we have that unwelcome taste in our mouth of them not making the tournament. So we're kind of nice to have that, and it's nice to have you all here today. Hopefully, we get some good information to you, and like Alana shared, as you have questions or comments, please don't hesitate to ask. We'll try to honor those things as we work through the content today. So appreciate you being here with us.
All right, so I'm going to kind of kick things off, and the first thing I want to talk about are some learning objectives. We have objectives for you guys, just like you probably have for your students and people who you oversee. So our goal for today's presentation is that we will define specially designed instruction, and you'll be able to walk away with a working definition that applies to your building. That you can identify considerations for planning and implementing SDI, and then we're going to go through some collaboration to plan for SDI. So this training is a training that we actually also have as a full day training. So please understand we're taking 6 hours of content and we are compacting it into an hour and a half. So there's a lot of information that we won't be able to cover, but just to echo what Matt and Alana said, if you have a question, please be sure to post that in the chat. We will be watching for those. We want to be sure that we can answer everything that we can in our time together. All right, Matt, go on, please. So the TA Center, we were formerly called the Indiana IEP Resource Center, and we are a state-funded technical assistance center through the Indiana Department of Education, but we are supported by Indiana State University as our fiscal agent. So we work really hard to increase knowledge, skills, and capacity of Indiana educators to improve outcomes for students with disabilities, which I love that because as a byproduct, it's really improved outcomes for all students, as we know research is showing us. And then we promote inclusive education with a belief in shared responsibility and equitable access benefiting all students. So that's just a little bit about us. Our website is iepta.org. Alana or Matt, if you could throw that in the website or in the chat. If you have not visited our website, I would encourage you to take a look at it. We have a lot of different Padlet resources on different topics. All right, so up next, here is the Padlet resource for this specific training. So I saw a question in the chat about the PowerPoint handout, and yes, you should have access to this. It will be linked on that Padlet. It should be in the first column on the far left. There's also some handout information. Are you able to include it with Yes, Matt, can you copy and paste that? Thank you so much. You'll probably have to do it from the other screen. Sorry. And then there are some links to books that our center recommends if you need resources for implementing SDI, as well as some different articles about inclusive practices and specially designed instruction. Okay, so hopefully I'm trying to also pull up that tablet link just in case Matt can't get it. Let's see. All right. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Okay. So we want to take a look at, let's see. What is specially designed instruction? So if you have access to the chat, just drop a few phrases or words in the chat of how you would define specially designed instruction to a new teacher or a colleague. And maybe your colleague is a general education teacher who doesn't have experience with SDI, but we know they can help. So how would you explain it? What a student gets that's different from general education curriculum. Okay, adapting instruction, special methods, instruction specific for the students. Oh, I like that, Molly. It's what the staff does. Yeah. Yes, these are great. Absolutely wonderful responses. So you guys can keep those pouring in. That is perfectly fine. We love to see those comments. So when we look at IDEA's definition is pretty vague of what specially designed instruction is. It says it's adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child that results from a child's disability and to ensure access of the child to the general curriculum. So a lot of the words that you guys used are also in this definition, and we are going to break down this definition today, and we're going to talk about the content, the methodology, delivery, and then we're going to talk about ensuring that access to the general education curriculum for all students. So if we look at SDI in context, we can think of it as a bullseye. So we have all of these different frameworks on the outside of our bullseye. So we have universal design for learning. We know that UDL is part of Indiana's ESSA plan. It's on that top part of the donut for Indiana. So really, universal design for learning is for everyone, right? That's why it's universal. Next, within that, we have differentiated instruction. So this is a teacher's reactive way of making content more accessible to students, whereas universal design is a bit more proactive. And then we have multi-tiered systems of support. So going back to Indiana's ESSA plan, we have universal design for learning on top, and we have that MTSS piece on the bottom. So those are really the two frameworks that we're looking at as universal. So those are for all students. And then within that bullseye in the middle, we get the specially designed instruction piece. And this piece is different, as most of you pointed out in your responses, in that it is something special. And we will say it so many times throughout this presentation, SDI is what makes special education special. Because if a student didn't need something taught or presented in a different way, then they would not need to have an IEP and have this SDI piece into it. So this illustration came from a book that our center highly recommends by Ann Benninghoff. The book is called Specially Designed Instruction, Increasing Success for Students with Disabilities. It's also linked in your Padlet. It is one of the best books as a general education teacher that I have read on SDI. That makes it practical, and it helps a general educator understand exactly how they can have a role in helping with SDI. All right, so going on. I have two screens going here, and I think I'm not being very successful with either one. So if I'm looking away from you guys, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on my other screen so that I can be sure I'm ahead of the game here. All right, so the three areas of focus for specially designed instruction per the definition from IDEA are content, methodology, and process. So SDI has been a part of federal special education law since 1975. But right now there's really an increased focus on SDI because it's the heart of what makes special education so unique. And SDI has to be carefully planned. It's not a whim. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different pieces and some different ways that we can plan for SDI. So the first area that we want to focus on is adapting the content. So this is what the students are learning. So we have to keep in mind that students with disabilities are expected to master the same standards as classmates without disabilities. So we all have the same standard that we're reaching for, but we can get there through different paths and avenues. It doesn't have to be the same. We're looking for those firm standards, but the flexible way of getting there. However, standards, as we know, can be met by learning through different content. So that's what I was just talking about. You know, we have this firm standard. How are we going to get there? It can look differently for everyone. So we know some different examples of like packaged content that we can use. Wilson Reading, Orton Gillingham, Read 180, Touch Math. You know, we have Spring Math. We have all of these programs that we can use, but not every corporation is going to have access to these, and maybe not every corporation wants to buy different packages. And so there really are things that we can do that aren't part of a packaged program. So when we look at adapting the content, we can look at things like alternate text. Maybe we just need to change the order of the content. Maybe we need to present things differently. So this is a teacher's response. And someone had mentioned that in their definition, that it was what we were doing, which is exactly right. We're the ones who are picking the order. Maybe we need to reconsider. Maybe we need to eliminate sections. And as we eliminate, you know, we need to think about and keep in mind, we've got this firm standard. If I eliminate, are they still going to be able to meet the standard? And then expanding the core curriculum to address some of those compensatory skills that some of our learners need. Maybe Braille, mobility training, or learning sign language. Ann Benninghoff says in her book, this is one of my favorite quotes from her book, and I say it at every training. She talks about how content is one of the first things that we try to adapt. And she says that years of low expectations have resulted in terrible outcomes for students with disabilities. Most students with disabilities will not need adapted content in order to be successful. Instead, they need changes to how they are being taught rather than what they are being taught. And I think that is such an important reminder to us as educators, because sometimes we get big caseloads, we have a lot of kids, and we just think, what can we content? It seems to be quick, right? To get that in. And so really just slowing down and rethinking about how we're teaching could be just as beneficial. So adapting might mean too that a student needs enriched information in order to avoid boredom. We all have those squiggly learners in class who already have the content down, and sometimes it exacerbates behaviors and it makes classroom management and disruptions increase. And so maybe we really need to consider giving the student content that is enriched. So the next thing that we can look at is adapting methodology. Sorry, Matt, I kind of went back on that. I didn't mean to. Is adapting methodology. So this is the most common form of SDI that we are looking at, and it's adapting how the students are being taught. So remember, universal design for learning is everybody. Differentiated instruction is for everybody. Those are not examples of specially designed instruction. So it's about instruction, strategies, and interventions and techniques that we can use as educators to help our students master standards. Specific methodologies are more likely than others to be more effective and efficient for students with disabilities. So we know that as we look at a student's goals and we are looking at what pieces of SDI does that student need, we need those to be research-based. We need to have those supported, saying, look, this has worked for a large number of students. We know that it's proven to help with others. And so we really need to examine that part of it. Things that adapted methodology might include, let's see. We have these integrated practices of macro SDI. So this is for like everybody, right? We're thinking macro on a bigger setting. So direct explicit instruction. All students can benefit from direct explicit instruction. But then we have things like modeling. So the teacher is modeling, maybe it's a co-taught classroom, and we have one teacher instructing, other teachers can model. It is important to keep in mind co-teaching is not SDI also. It's really about what's being done within that co-teaching framework. Chaining, we have forward chaining, we have backward chaining, showing students what a finished project is going to look like and then working backward from there. And we have the forward chaining, right? Practicing until you master that skill, and then we take the next step. And then we can also look at things like task analysis in this methodology component. Okay, so then I think we have one more slide of methodology. Yeah, so intensive phonemic awareness instruction. So we know that's where some of those programs like Orton Gillingham can really come in handy. Using multisensory methods. So looking at ways to appeal to different senses of a child. Maybe it's visually representing something. Maybe it's being taught how to write something out. Maybe it has to do with sound, but really exploring the different senses and using alternate math strategies if you're in math. I don't know that I saw any math people, but I'm sure we've got some math folks in here as well. Okay, so when we look at adapting delivery of instruction, this is adapting when and where the students are being taught. So the instructional context, so location, general education classroom, or a separate setting. And keep in mind, we want to limit those separate settings as much as possible and do push-in services as much as possible. Even things like speech, if we can push in, it's even more beneficial for the student. Group size, is it whole group instruction with the whole class? Maybe it's a large group, maybe it's a small group, maybe it's just individual or independent. And so that's another area that we can look at. And then the dosage. So maybe a student needs more time, extended time with the content, or maybe we need to do some pre-teaching and reteaching, taking 5 minutes the day before to do a little pre-teach with the student, which could be done within the general education classroom, and maybe follow up with some reteaching that might be done during a resource time, or again, can very easily be adapted into the general education classroom. This is something, if you're a co-teacher, these practices you can really practice and get really good at in that co-taught classroom of pulling different flexible groups back and doing some reteaching and some pre-teaching for those students who need it. Okay, so then we have some examples of delivery of instruction. This is just different learning strategies, acronym-based learning. So those are the things like PEMDAS, if you're math, right? Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Maybe you're trying to teach about a constructed response and you use the thank you, ma'am method. Anything like that. Marilyn Friend has several different acronym-based learning strategies that should be linked on your Padlet for you. And if you're interested in those and you don't see them, just let us know. We'll give you all of our contact information and we are happy to share that. And then increased instructional intensity. So that could be the pre-teaching and the reteaching, right? Maybe we need more practice. Maybe we need more steps. Maybe we need more review. Okay, so I saw a comment in the chat that I wanted to address. Oh, and I'm typing a bunch of zeros. Okay. Task analysis as an accommodation. So just throwing that out there, what does task analysis mean to your district or maybe to you, depending on what your role is? And Matt or Alana, if you have anything to add about task analysis, I think it's a beneficial thing to discuss right now.
Sure. You know, I would just recall, Katie, you mentioned Ann Benninghoff, and one of the things that she talks about a lot to define task analysis is more like a metacognitive approach, just looking at how do I think about this process? How do I walk myself through this, breaking it down as an adult, and what steps do I go through to get this done, and just give you a framework for how to teach that. So that's just the way a different method of instruction. You know, I would be curious on how we would approach it, think about it as an accommodation, you know, because I would, I guess in this circumstance or this context, it's thinking about the process, the task we're trying to get the student to learn and breaking it down into those pieces so I can, because sometimes, I'll use my peanut butter sandwich analogy here. I've got my list of analogies in my head here, but it's like that. The task, I know, I remember my kids doing this. They had to write a step-by-step plan on how to instruct another person to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the fun part was in class, then the kids had to actually follow those steps exactly as they were written. And you got all kinds of mess with that because the kids would forget a piece and that's part of what task analysis is to really look at all the pieces and make sure the student's not missing any of those little components. Because that's something, you know, if you forget to tell people to take the bread out of the bag first, you're going to have a hard time making a sandwich, you know, or if there's all those little bitty steps and that's exactly. Can you guys hear me okay?
I'm good.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just had a comment that I couldn't be heard. So, you know, that's the piece that I think of a task analysis. You know, if you want a student to achieve a certain target, then you have to break it down and do that. And we do that with annual goals all the time, where we look at the overall target we'd like to get to, then what are the objectives that we have to meet in order to attain that? And that's another way to apply that same kind of concept.
Yes, and we're going to talk, it's kind of a nice segue here in just a few minutes about the difference between an accommodation and truly what is SDI. that SDI piece, if we're saying it's task analysis, we have to be sure that we are teaching that step, right? So if we're breaking it down and we want the student to break down or prioritize, we have to give them those examples. We have to walk through it with them. So often I have seen teachers give just a checklist to a student, and a checklist really means nothing to a student unless they've gone through it, practiced, and really created it themselves, because they don't have that capacity of thinking through what you meant on that list. So if you gave a grocery list to someone who's never gone to a grocery store before, as you're making the list and you write down apple, you are mentally walking yourself through that grocery store. You have a picture in your mind. You know where you're going to walk to in the grocery store. You know what the apple looks like. You know exactly in your mind what color the apple is going to be, how big you want it, and you can pick it and put it in your bag. Someone who's never gone to the grocery store is going to see apple and not have that name connected to the part of the brain that tells me when I see it, apple, what it is. And so we just have to very strategically plan for that instruction. So the purpose of SDI is to address the unique needs that result from the child's disability. And we have to remember that accommodations are not SDI. Classroom tools are not SDI. And I realize I skipped over a screen or a slide. So oh no, we talked about this. I think you might have gone back. Yeah, so
I went back to the task analysis piece since we were talking about that. So
gotcha. I was like, oh, maybe I didn't talk about that. Yeah. So, and as we look at the purpose of SDI, the purpose of SDI is really to ensure that access. So giving the student what they need in order to get to meet the standard that the other general education peers are meeting. So the general education classroom provides for the most equitable access to that general education curriculum. All right, I think, go ahead. Okay, so yeah, you can't teach a child to swim by taking them out of the pool. Absolutely love that. We can tie that into special education. We can tie that into specially designed instruction, right? The students need to be in the general education classroom to learn the general education content. So again, it's about the child can meet the educational standards that apply to all children. So it's not just exposing them to the gen ed curriculum, but it's really about helping them to meet in that. All right, so we're going to look at, is it SDI? So go on to the next one. Oh, this is not the virtual presentation. That's okay. So we're going to pull up a poll on Zoom. Alana, I think you are going to take it over from here.
I think Matt's next, but we can
do the activity here.
I can do that. All right. So do you guys see a poll or not? Not yet. All right, let me relaunch it. Sorry. Okay, do you guys see a poll now? All right. So can you guys answer this poll? If you think it's SDI or an accommodation, you just click your choice. No one is going to get graded. We are anonymous. We will just be able to see if you guys know if it's SDI or an accommodation. So if you think it's an accommodation, put that. If you think a calculator is SDI or an accommodation, just click your answers. We're going to give you a couple seconds to do that. You guys are good. Let's see. Now, what's interesting to me is, and when I did IEP compliance and I looked at IEPs, I did in the SDI box, where you put what SDI is for that goal. I did also see visuals and manipulatives as SDI before we did some training, and we can talk about that. So some of them you guys got really well, like the modeling through Think Aloud, 100%. Looks like a couple of them that you were a little bit split with, but 100% looked like the calculator was 100% with an accommodation, and the modeling with the Think Aloud was 100% with SDI, and those are correct. Does anybody have any questions about the other ones? You can unmute yourself if you want to talk, or put it in the chat, or maybe if you think. So number 2, graphic organizer. Yeah, we're just going to go through them really quick. So number 2, the graphic organizer. So that would be an accommodation because all students are able to use a graphic organizer. Teachers can pass those out. That's good, best practice, maybe if you're doing something like that. But the direct use of a graphic organizer, which means I'm going to show you how to use a graphic organizer, you're going to be able to develop your graphic organizer on your own. Then that would be SDI if the student needs it, if that's tailored towards his needs to help with that organizational, maybe in his writing or her writing. Manipulatives, again, so that is all students that, in math especially, students need those manipulatives so they can see it. But that isn't SDI. That is something that all students are able to have if they have an IEP or not. That is not the teacher is not doing the behavior. The teacher is not teaching that strategy to the student. The teacher is not doing anything on that part. They're just handing out those manipulatives. So that is an accommodation. And then again, the last one you guys did 100%, everybody got the SDI with the modeling through and the Think Aloud. Does anybody have any questions on that? Thank you guys for participating. We like to see what you're thinking. All right. If you guys have any comments, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to let Matt take it away.
Okay, I guess that's my cue. Better start talking now. So the big ideas, and I think we kind of covered these pretty well so far. But I want to make sure we kind of refresh ourselves on these concepts a bit as we're moving forward, because we're going to look at some scenarios here shortly and just kind of put some of this into a bit of practice. Katie touched on this with differentiation and universal design for learning. And in that, these are things that all students have access to. These are general education initiatives that every student has. Now, differentiation is a little more specific and reactive to student need, but UDL is kind of preparing for any need that erupts. So we have some things in place. Content and homework support. The key on all these things is you don't necessarily have to have an IEP to get them. Modifications possibly, but those could be physical modifications also. So if you have a physical issue at the school, you might need those temporarily. So consider those. Specially designed instruction is only accessible by students who are eligible for special education. An IEP is the only thing that can get you specially designed instruction. So that's a really key piece to understand. So if everybody else gets it, because sometimes we see that when we look at, and I think all three of us have heard this before, that the general education teacher is taking care of that. This is what they get. If it's not a little bit different, maybe a small bit different, and it's not a little bit different than the peers are getting, then specially designed instruction is not really there. So it's important that it is something special. It is something different, and in addition to what everyone else is getting. So that's a big, a big piece to kind of get your mind around as you're looking through that. And it's instructional. That's one of the key things that when we get to do this, that last activity in a big group on our daily session, you get to see, those things that are specially designed instruction. There's a key piece of each one that instruction's involved. There's a key piece each and every time. So what a specially designed instruction is instruction. Something's being taught and hopefully learned in that interchange there. So if I'm providing accommodations, I'm not necessarily teaching you anything. I'm providing you supports so you can access content and curriculum. Get my clicker going here. So when we think about possible domains, and this is kind of a technical perspective on some of this, but Marilyn framed it up this way. These are just the areas that special design instruction can come to play. So typically academics pop up first, behavioral organization also comes in play, but make sure you look through those pieces, and are there needs that exist for the student in those areas? Are there things that they need to be taught in order to make progress, to improve their access to the curriculum and their interactions with their peers? And those are all areas that can be addressed in an IEP and through specially designed instruction. So one of the big pieces that, and I think we might get to it a little bit later on, I don't want to steal the thunder too much, but when graphic organizer comes up a lot as a piece, as an accommodation, but teaching how to use it, or teaching how to use a communication device, or teaching them how to use a tool in their setting is specially designed instruction. Once they've learned how to use it, the benefit they get from it, then that can roll into it as an accommodation. So that can be a little bit of a, I don't know, touchy area there. You got any comments or questions? Yeah, I think that's the big piece. I was going to say, somebody got it right, and it was Katie typing in the chat. I was getting fired up that someone agreed with me on the teaching part, but that's such a big piece of this. And it is, sometimes we overcomplicate this. Not that it's not a complicated concept, but it comes down to teaching and learning. That's the bottom line. And we'll talk about, I think later on, a lot of hits on who can provide and what that can look like. So I don't want to steal that thunder away from her. So one of the big things I think that, and we have two slides that address the same kinds of things. One from each of our actual book, I guess, source books, really. How do you know something is specially designed instruction? And they have some very common concerns. Is it aligned with present levels? So that, we talk about this when we do goals and IEP development and all those kind of things about the internal consistency in the IEP. Specially designed instruction is a key component of that too. We want to connect with present levels. Is it addressing a goal? Is it research or evidence-based? And we're going to talk about and share some resources where you can find some more tools there. If you're short, if your bag of tricks is running out, sometimes you need that extra tool. And I think we've got some that we can share that'll help you with that. It's systematic. So it's planned, it's delivered, it's documented and evaluated. So progress monitoring happens. And it's addressing those deficits that we observe for that student already. And I think one of the pieces that we overlook sometimes is, we want to make sure the skills transfer from grade to grade from time to time, and that maintenance is part of this process, that we plan to check in. They still know how to do this, because so much of our skills build one upon the other. If a student forgets something, we might have to go back and reteach something that we thought they might have had. I can't remember, I can remember doing that almost every year, where we'd have a break or a long weekend, and we think we have something on a Friday, and we come back after and we got to start there again. We're not quite there. We lost a little our edge there, and the summer is a big example of that as well. I don't want to talk too much about summer. It's still a little ways off. We're just kicking off in the spring yet, so just don't get our hopes up yet. We're still got something to look forward to. But this is from Benninghoff, and I really like. I have to agree with Katie too. I really like her book. She does a nice job. If you get a chance to look through that, she does a nice job of walking through the details and practical questions and applications for specially designed instruction. But hers come down to some basic questions. Is it special? And really think about that as you're looking at the IEPs and the programs we design for our students. Is this special? Does it address their unique needs? So one of the things I want to make sure I mention too, it doesn't mean we can't work with students in groups when we talk about this, but their unique needs can be addressed in a group of students. So that's something we do that in a classroom every day. That every student in that classroom learns a little differently, has a little different needs. They're all still in the same classroom. So we can, in special education, we don't have to be just one-on-one all the time. And when we did our first couple of run-throughs of this presentation, I think some folks came away with thinking that we are intending this to be more individualized. It may need to be sometimes, but when possible, you can group students together. I think that goes without saying. Well, obviously it doesn't go without saying, or I wouldn't be saying it. But it's related to an IEP goal. So that's one of the pieces, the connection between SDI and the goal is it's the bridge between the present levels or what we know about the student now and where we'd like to end up in terms of that goal. So specially designed instruction is how do we plan to get there? So progress monitoring on the goal keeps us in check. It keeps us in line. Are we making the progress we anticipate? Are we on the right track? That's why we progress monitor. That feedback informs our specially designed instruction to change if needed. Is it instructional? Is it a tool? It shouldn't be a tool or an accommodation. It should be instructional, intentional. We mean to do it. We're designing it to bring about progress. And one of the big things, making sure things can be transferred in a general or in a generalizable. That's a hard word for me to say for some reason, but as we look at students and the things we teach and students learn from us, is it only going to be meaningful in that environment, or is it going to be something that's transferable elsewhere, or can be generalized into a larger setting? So if I teach a student a skill in a small setting, are they ready to perform this in a larger setting? That's one of the reasons it's important initially in an IEP to define what a small group is for a student. So this is where they're going to perform the skill first, and eventually want to expand that area so they can perform that skill in a larger area or in a different situation. And I think this is a key thing. Sometimes we overlook this when we start, the idea here is to build independence for our students. So what tools are we giving them so they're less dependent on us? So sometimes that's hard for us as educators to allow, but because we want kids to, we enjoy working with them. We want to work with them more when possible, but as a special educator, the purpose is less special education in their life eventually. So that's not going to be possible for every student, obviously, but that's the goal for most students, that we want to reduce the amount of support they need, give them those tools to be more independent. And that's the target. It may not happen in elementary school, but that's the target down the road to get to that piece. So what I want you to do is kind of think about these questions, and I'll flash back to them here as I go through. And I think we have, looking at where we are on time-wise, at least we'll do the first, there's 3 scenarios here. We'll probably just do the first 2 unless we feel like we need another example. But the idea here is there's going to be some scenarios laid out for you explaining the teacher's interaction with the student. And your job is to determine, is this specially designed instruction or not? So we're going to keep an eye on the chat here and see what you think, and maybe not just explain, or I'm sorry, not just decide one or the other, but maybe explain why. Why do you believe it's specially designed instruction, or why do you believe it's not? So we have a little understanding of your thought process there. And if you're exceptionally brave, you can always unmute and join us in the conversation. That's always an option for you, but we'll be looking for the chat first. So however you feel comfortable communicating, we'd be happy to have the interaction. So let's go ahead and look at the first scenario here. And I'll go ahead and read this. I went ahead and used my own name here, so I'm not calling out anybody. I'm not going to tell you that these are the most perfect IEP goals, so I don't want us to get caught up too much in that piece, but this is just the general idea. That the goal is something along the lines that the student or Matt will initiate tasks when verbally directed by a teacher or staff. And if we're doing a goal training, we could probably break that down a lot, but the idea, and this is a description of what's going on in the classroom with the student and teacher. So a special ed teacher provides services 3 times per week. When she is present, she makes eye contact with Matt before repeating the teacher's verbal instruction. She models how to start the routine and verbally praises him when he begins. She circulates around the classroom, but checks in on Matt more than other students. So, give yourself a few seconds there. You can reread that. I'm going to leave it up there. But when you're ready, in the chat, you can also put, I don't know. That's absolutely true. Or you can just keep quiet and wait for other people to make their decisions and then join in. Or lurk, I guess, is what I do that sometimes. But when you lead through this scenario, what do you think? Is this specially designed instruction as it's described, as we've talked about it, or is it something else? Okay. You guys enjoy it? This is one of the few times I don't talk, so I'm letting everybody else jump in. Yeah, and I think everybody's kind of keen on the modeling piece, and I think that that's been mentioned, but I will talk about that here shortly. And right. Well, I think you guys are hitting on some key pieces here. I'm gonna keep. Yeah, we got a lot of folks are focusing on the modeling. We're catching up with there's some I don't know and yes and no, and I think, and then also the modeling. The modeling is one of those key phrases we mentioned in what delivery can look like, and for a student. But we'll get into modeling a little more specifically later on. When we model something, it's not just modeled. Yeah, I think it's walking the student through the task together too. So there's teacher modeling first, and then there's a process that follows. So that's not really indicated here very well. And and most of what we're seeing here is, well, and is not specifically instruction. It's support. It's checking in, praising, reinforcing, those kind of things. Exactly. And that we're going to get to that's exactly Kaylee, like I do, we do, you do. We're going to talk a little bit about that specific process. And I would agree that this one is not, it's not instructionally based. It's more of an set of accommodations that are being played out every day. And not that this is a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. It is not a bad thing when it's set up. A lot of times this is, and one of the reasons I like this scenario is because this is what happens in classrooms almost every day. We have an assistant or a teacher who's just walking students, reinforcing things, being there for that student. And that's a fantastic thing. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to put this into a negative light. I'm just saying that this is not specially designed instruction. And so compare this one with the next scenario. So as you look at this is the same teacher, same student, same goal. So when I look at this one, the special education teacher arrives in the classrooms, and a few minutes prior to the activity, she pulls Matt and two of his peers to a small group as helpers. The teacher displays 3 pictures of the cleanup process and asks the student to place them in correct sequence as quickly as they can. She uses a pre-taught gesture for listen, so that Matt listens closely as she asks his peers to discuss how fast they should work. So they have some things that have already been taught this student. We have a cue for you to listen to the task. And then the students choose a goal time for finishing the process, and Matt sets a timer. Then she then turns the sequence pictures over and asks Matt to recall the steps and say them aloud. When the classroom teacher gives a direction to clean up, Matt gets to work with a special education teacher, observes and collects behavioral data. So she's teaching and reinforcing what I'm giving too much. I need to shut up at this point. And when you look at this one, can you feel the difference between those two pieces? And the first one's kind of vague on what exactly is the student trying to, or what are we trying to teach the student? What do we want them to learn? The second scenario, we give a little bit better picture. And I think you hit it right away to this one. Who was that one? I'll give you good credit here. Sharon, right away, it's specially designed instruction because there's direct instruction on the process. We're showing you the process. We're having the student work on that process. And then I want you to show me the process later on. So there's teaching and there's pre-teaching going on, and small group peer. So there's a lot of, I think you guys are catching it right off the bat as we're looking at this. So we're looking at the pre-teaching. You can see the instruction happening here. And what I really like about this activity with the students is it pulls them in with their peers. Even though they're working on something different, they're working on it together. They're going through this planned approach, looking at the sequence, and then coming into a process together. So I think it's a really powerful example here. So first of all, thank you so much for participating with that piece. That was really nice, really good insight, and I really loved your comments as we go through this. And I know we all enjoy the interaction as we're going through these virtual sessions. So I can't say how happy that makes me when I see everybody jumping in like that. So really appreciate that. So these are the first, so just really want to make sure we can see the difference between those. And I know the giveaway is one's a lot longer than the other. That's easy to see, but it's more involved. There's a lot more going on for this student, and it doesn't mean it takes a whole lot of time either. So this second scenario doesn't necessarily take any more class time for that teacher than the first one. And it doesn't necessarily mean we're spending the whole class period with that particular in that classroom, I suppose. So that's something to think about also with specially designed instruction. How much instruction do they need? How much support is required for the student to make the progress that we'd like to, think about that dosage idea and the volume of instruction and intensity of instruction here. How much do they need to make that gain and to work towards what their peers are working on? So let me slide through. I think this is my handoff point. I thought it was my handoff point here. So.
All right, I'm up.
That's right. Thank you, Alana. And I'll hand it off to you.
All right. So who can provide specially designed instruction will be me. We'll move on to the next slide. Well, this is a great news for you special education teachers because it's not just you. We have a shared responsibility. It is the general education teachers can too as well. I was a special education teacher and I had paraprofessionals in my classroom. And under my direct supervision, they watched me do it first. They were in my classroom and they were able to also deliver SDI after I modeled and after I showed them how to do it very specifically. But so it is great that it's not just a special education teacher. It could be the PT, OT, speech, depending on the student's goals, and gen ed is allowed to as well. So those IEP at a glances are very important to share with all of your people so that they can help you provide this to students. So that is under the legal definition. Yep, shared responsibility. Thank you, Katie. So do you have people on your team? Are you guys and we put it in the chat, who are your people on your school? Like, does the special education teacher seem to do it by themselves? Or do you guys have good relationships with the gen ed teacher and your related services? Do you guys talk about students together? Or do you think you might need to work on that? I'm just curious where you are, but it really is a shared responsibility. The more people, the better. I love it that you work as a team at your school. That's great. And if not, then we need to shift that thinking to being more of a team approach than just really one person approach. It really is helpful. But if you want to, and I don't know if you have an SDI team, somebody around Greenwood was talking about it, or I think yes, relationship with gen ed, that's great, and other related services. Just checking out your chat. So it's great if you have the more people, the better, in my opinion, not just on your shoulders. So planning for SDI. We're going to talk about what it takes, all the steps that it takes to plan for SDI. We're going to kind of go into each planning step for you in this virtual training. It's a little bit bigger when we do the full day, but we're going to dive in deep in there. So again, Matt talked about this already, but we do have to start with the present levels. The IEP needs to tell a story. There should be a direct relationship between the present levels and the other components of the IEP. So if it's not in the present levels, it shouldn't be taken out for the goals. It really needs to be mentioned in all parts. We need to have data. It describes the problem with the child's reading level in the present levels, and you need to know exactly where the student is starting, baseline data, in order to have a goal to meet that need. It should be addressed under both goals, specific and special education, and related services provided to the child. As we know, if the student has a behavior goal, there needs to be some mention of it in the present level. So everything needs to align. And I know that sounds like it's, yeah, we know that's like 101, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes we pull an IEP and there was not any information in the present levels to address what the goal is. It really should all make sense and it should all be a story and it all should align. Legally, you have to have a statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So, how the child's disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the gen ed curriculum. Or for preschool, as appropriate, how the disability affects the child's participation in appropriate activities. So these things have to be in there. Also, you notice how I said functional performance. You have to, even if a student has appropriate functional, like they can navigate their school, they have appropriate behavior according to their grade peers, you still have to put something in there to about the functional performance of your students. So I know that it's been a couple of years that we've already had to do that, but I just want to reiterate that too, making sure that you note that somewhere in that present level. So planning for STI, it's intended to address the student's IEP goals. It is instruction tailored for them and adjusted as needed that enables them to reach those goals. But special educators should also understand the characteristics of their students that will shape all instruction. So we're planning for STI because students will reach their goals if we give them that specially designed instruction. But bigger than that, they're going to learn in a certain way based on their unique needs of their disability. So we need to make sure that we have that in mind. We're trying to have them reach their goals, but in bigger than that we know that students with learning disabilities need those mnemonics, devices like Katie was saying. Oftentimes it's research-based. They're going to learn all of the material better. And if the teachers know that about those students, then they're going to be able to learn more of those standards in that general education. So it's great that they're reaching their goals, but we have to make sure the bigger picture is we're really trying to have them master those standards or get as close as possible to mastering those standards. So it's really important. And this is just talking about collaborative development. You guys in your chat, some of you guys said you had really good team approach, collaborative implementation, and collaborative evaluation. So really talking about when you're making SDI with special ed and gen ed, you need to have input from both teachers and related services. Then you need to implement it, and then you need to evaluate it. You don't have to have students come out of the gen ed classroom for you to progress monitor, right? You could get some artifacts from their gen ed classroom that as long as it matches what you need. So you're not always having to reinvent the wheel to pull them out to progress monitor. We really need to see what they're doing in that gen ed environment as long as they're there, so that we can see what they're doing there and then ask the gen ed teacher for help to see how they're doing with that STI. So really having that collaborative environment is important, and making sure the general education and the whole team knows what goals those students are going to be working on. So you can help me with progress monitoring, and I don't always have to maybe pull from a different setting that they're already doing and across curriculum. So that's what we're thinking of there. Okay, so how many of you guys put it in the chat if you thumbs up or thumbs down if you know what MTSS is, or if you use it in your school? You could chat it up, or you can use use emoji. So we can change it. We can change it up, or you don't have to, but if you guys know what MTSS is and you're using it in your school, thumbs up. If not, thumbs down, or you guys can chat and tell me what you're doing. So on the right, like Katie said earlier, MTSS is gen ed. Well, that's good. You guys are using it, right? It's interventions. It should not be how students get to go to the evaluation for special education. Right? It should be MTSS is for students who need it based on their needs. They get interventions based on their social and their academic needs and their behavior. It's the whole child approach to students. The IEP process in the document on the left is illegal. Students that have been evaluated and they have an IEP, they have to have it, right? It's legal. In the middle, some students that have IEPs might have some support through the MTSS system too. That should be how it is. If students need those interventions, just because they qualify for an IEP, then that doesn't magically mean the 30 minutes with the reading teacher is going to get them up there, right? So some schools, that's what it means, but it shouldn't mean that. It really should mean that if students are doing well with those interventions, they also qualify for the reading help, that they get both. And that should be in that middle part. So kids can get those interventions if they need it. That doesn't always happen. But it looks like that a lot of you guys are doing some sort of MTSS in your building, which is great. Awesome. I see a lot of thumbs up. That's good. My last training, there was nobody knew what MTSS was. So it's just interesting to me how it just depends on how you are. So, and it's fine. It's not, it's just, it's going on sometimes, and it's not going on somewhere. Thank you for that. We'll go to the next one. All right, so this is the big part. So planning for SDI. So planning for SDI, here are the steps to get there. So the first step is clarifying the learning target. What do you want the students to know by the end of the hour? You need to put it in student-friendly language, okay? So the students will explain how conflict affects plot, right? So that maybe that's the standard, and then the learning objective, you're gonna, tailor it down. The standard is big. Making sure that the verb is not fixed, but flexible. So if you say explain, it doesn't say the students have to write, correct? They can maybe tell you, they can maybe make a PowerPoint, maybe they can make a slideshow, maybe they can make a screencastify of how conflict affects plot. So making sure that, first of all, you have a learning target, that the students know what they're supposed to do at that by the end of the hour, but also that verb can be flexible so that more students can get to that learning target. So just thinking about that when you're planning. Pinpoint difficult moments. I know last year when we taught about conflict, internal conflict was really hard for these kids. They didn't understand me versus me and what that means. So I'm going to make sure that I do a lot more pre-teaching before we even start that, because my students, maybe with disabilities or maybe not, there's some kids in 7th grade that's really hard. They don't understand that. So I know that this year, so I'm going to pinpoint those difficult moments and plan that before. There's choose IEP goals to address. Like I said, you don't have to pull out those students to take them to work on IEP goals. You really shouldn't be doing that. If students have writing goals, or if they have any kind of reading goals, then you can do that in that reading class or in that math class. So you have to know which goals the students have and possibly maybe group them together. Maybe you're doing stations in your class. A couple of the kids that have similar goals can work together in a group with a couple kids that don't have any goals, so that you can assess them that way. Identify the metacognitive process. And I think somebody talked about the gradual release model, like my think aloud. So I'm going to practice my think aloud. How do I do every step? Matt talked about the peanut butter and jelly process. I need to make sure I'm going to put myself in the student's shoes. I know nothing about the topic, and I'm going to be able to model how I know that it is internal conflict in the paragraph. I'm going to go step by step, and I'm going to practice this. If I go to my classroom the day, if I'm a co-teacher and I don't get any of that information until I go to the class and it's 5 minutes before we're starting, I'm going to have a hard time doing the model because I did not practice that. And that happened to me before when I was a co-teacher. It's a lot better when I have that material before, so that I can go through that, so I can teach the students a lot better. I also used to videotape myself so I could do my think alouds and see where I needed to practice. So that just helps me to help them. That's just another side note on that. Adapt the general approach. So like I said, if you have 25 students in your class and 20 of them get it, but there's 5 kids that you know that are going to struggle the next day on whatever lesson you're going to do. Maybe those 20 students, you're going to have them do an independent or research on their computers, and then you're going to take those 5 students in a small group, and you're going to pre-teach what's going to happen tomorrow, because you know that they need a head start. Right. So you're going to adapt the general approach. You're going to take those small students and you're going to give them more vocabulary. You have students with the ELL, they're going to need help. So you're going to do that. You're going to front load them. Attend to access skills, and then you're going to talk about executive functioning skills with the class. So you know that kids need to have help with organizing, or they need the students that are in the class. If you say that you need to do something for 20 minutes, it's really hard for them to stay focused. So you're going to have a visual timer on the, you're going to have a visual timer so they could count down and see that, because you have to teach those executive skills to those students and talk about those. And then you're going to boost participation. So those students that you're pre-teaching to, you're going to give them the questions ahead of time, so that maybe the next day that they'll be able to start off the discussion in full class, because they're going to know the answers. So that's what you're going to do for boosting participation. And then you're going to implement the SDI, and then you're assessing, and then you're going to start all over again. That was a lot. I realize that. But does anybody have any questions on each of those? Again, these are all step by step in that Ann Bettinghoff book that we like, the SDI, the Planning for SDI. I was trying to provide some concrete examples, and I'm sorry, but my mind goes to ELA before it goes to math, but we can work on that as well. But that is just kind of like all of those steps together and with a little bit of examples of how each part goes. Does anybody have any questions or anything on that? I talked a lot on that one. But thumbs up if that was pretty clear. Media, if it's okay. I don't know what emoji you could use. I'm not sure if it's if you need me to clarify anything, you can ask, but please use the chat for that. Keep on going, Matt. Oh, okay. So clarifying the learning target. So here, yeah. So I have a question. Can this be applied with adult students with special needs? Yeah. So do you do the population like the 18 to 22-year-olds or just older than 18, or which population? I think this is just good planning for everybody. Yes, and above. I think it's just good planning for everybody, the pre-teaching, the reteaching, you teaching strategies, making sure that your learning target, like this says, clarifying the learning target, making sure that if the standard doesn't say that they have to write, then you can do all these different things. Like maybe you can draw the main idea. Maybe you can talk about the problem solving process when you're doing science experiment. You don't always have to, you can take away those barriers that more students would have access to knowing if they understand what the learning objective is. So these are some flexible verbs that you guys can take on. And then there's constrictive verbs. Like I said, if it always says the students have to write, like if that's what your learning objective is in your classroom, and the kids that maybe they know the answers, but they can't write it out, that will be really hard for them. So just thinking about how you could make it a little bit more flexible. Does anybody have anything to add about that? I think I saw some things in the chat, but I'm not sure. Yes. All right. So specially designed instruction on the left, again, and the classroom instruction on the right, and in the middle, the specially designed instruction should be happening in gen ed classrooms, in special education classroom. It could be, again, sometimes it's in the resource, that's over here on the left, if you guys are in resource, or if you guys are just in self-contained classrooms, that's where it happens. It happens in OT, PT, speech. So making sure that you know where you're progress monitoring wherever students are. Sometimes kids do a lot better on their goals when they're with you and you pull them into your class, or maybe you're in your speech setting and you're one-to-one, and then they put them back into their, in the gen ed, and then they're like, well, they're not doing as well in the goals. So we really want to make sure we're progress monitoring everywhere they are. And like Matt said, it's really important to go towards that independence. We want those kids to take that skill. We're going to teach that skill, and they're going to be able to generalize it no matter where they go, not just, with me in the speech room, but we really want them to do this all over, all settings, across settings. Research-based and data-driven again. So prior to planning SDI, we have to determine what evidence exists and establish the effectiveness for each of their levels. Like we talked about, consideration like disability, age, setting, subject area, and specific skills. There are websites, and I think we're going to get to it, that you guys can look up interventions that are based on research. So they're research-based because SDI has to be research-based, and it talks about fidelity, which means like how good is it? Like if you do this 30 minutes, this 3 times a week, this is the results for these students. It goes by age, it goes by, I think, like subject area. You can search a lot of different ways if you do not know where to start, or if you want to get different ideas for some research-based and data-driven things. So we're going to give you we're going to give you a website to look at, and you might even have one that you use. You can share out that too. If you do, put it in the chat. If you have any place that you know that you get your intervention work, if you get your SDI, if you get any of that research-based data-driven things, put that in the chat and share with your friends, because this is how we learn, right? When we get to share with each other. And then, so the special education teacher implementation on the left, we have to just think about from this, I think this graph is that we really are trying to close that achievement gap. We're really trying to make sure that the progress is, we're making that progress as a special education teacher. We have to get to those standards, right? And like Katie said, I mean, sometimes it's a big gap. And if that intervention isn't going quick enough, we're not going to ever reach it. So we really have to evaluate that SDI to make sure that it's working, and make sure that it's working pretty fast, because we have to catch up on all this growth. I heard one of our colleagues always said, like, when she was in the classroom, she thought that her students were making tons of growth, and she's like, oh my gosh, we had like 4 points on our NWEA, and but the other kids were like at 20 points. They increased 20 points by the last time, and she thought like 4 to 5 points were really good. And they were having parties and they were celebrating, which is great. You need to. But if the general education students are expected to make this many points, we have to try to get there too. So just talking and collaborating with our counterparts and making sure we know where they're supposed to be by the end of 7th grade, 6th grade, whatever grade it is, where they're supposed to be at the semester is really important. So making sure the special education teacher is invited to the table with those curriculum maps and all of those kinds of things. And hopefully you guys are in those planning processes or those PLCs that you go to, and making sure you know where all the students are supposed to be so that your kids, all of your kids, can make it there. Oh no, you're not. I think it's so important to be in part, to invite yourself to the party, because you really need to know what's going on. I mean, you shouldn't be siloed. You should be trying to break down those silos, those are all of our students. So I need to know where our students need to be. You are a very valuable member of that team. So I'm hoping that if you're not invited, that you invite yourself. That's what I'm going to say. Invite yourself to the party. I would go in there, bring some donuts and sit down. Matt says yes too. I see him nodding. I hope you guys agree with me. Yeah, well, I would invite myself. I think maybe because I've did it for like a long time and I'm old now, I would just invite myself to that and not even worry about it. Because you could say, like, I really need to know where our kids are supposed to be. Like this, I'm part of, and this is what we also always say. All students are general education students first. Some students receive special education services for math or reading or speech or whatever. However, all of our students are special education students first with services. So maybe you can use that line and tell them Matt said so. Okay. You can say me. I don't care, actually. I'm just kidding, but really it's important.
Yeah, let me know if that works. It doesn't go too well at home. See how that goes.
I'm just kidding, but really it's important, I think. You can move to the next thing. Bumper sticker. Yes. Someone said bumper sticker. All right. We're going to have Matt introduce this. We're going to do one more thing, an interactive thing, and then we're going to close out.
Okay. So we are going to look at just one scenario here. I think that's what we have time for today. And I'm going to go ahead and slide over to it. I guess we're going to go to the scenarios, aren't we? There we go. So when we look at this particular scenario here, I just want to make sure that's where we're headed to, because there's some content in there that I want to overlook for us. I know we have short time to go through, but I just want you to take a little time to go look at this scenario. Now, this is just a broad picture of a student, so that's not really present levels. And we talked about this yesterday a little bit. And so what I'd like you to do is just take a little time to read through this little piece of information around Jose here and kind of think about, what information would we have in this case? So what if I was going to be working with a student, what information would I anticipate having that would tell me more detail, and from there just kind of plan ahead about what kind of special design instruction might we get to. So this student is a 5th grader. He's been to 3 different schools. He adapts well, positive attitude, does well in math, enjoys science and social studies, is able to decode. And I think a lot of us have encountered students like this consistently, able to decode. However, when comprehension has difficulty and with answering questions that require reasoning and total understanding of the story, difficulty with main idea, and identifying the main idea components of a story, The teacher said all he enjoys reading, but does not seem frustrated, will not ask for help, and his reading grades begin to suffer. So these are the instructional goals. So these are more a general educator's perspective on given a reading passage at an instructional level. Student Jose will answer inferential and evaluation comprehension questions. And in the same manner with, he'll also recall the main story elements. So for us to really design specially designed instruction, we would need a little bit more than just these general statements. I think that's the conversation that we have had as we look at this before. You know, we would want to know what exactly is he answering now? How many of how many? What kind of things is he reading now? What's the reading level look like? What's his pace? What's the fluency in reading? You know, it says in general what the fluency is, but maybe we should know what specifically it is. And then how does he answer those comprehension questions? And I would also be curious if you change the level of the reading, as he answer questions more accurately, if the reading is less difficult, less challenging, or is it just a consistent thing where the decoding is and the fluency is really not happening, even though his decoding speed is there. So I don't know, with Katie and Alana, what kind of concept, what would you add to that conversation? Put you guys on the spot too. I feel like I'm
Well, I was also are we gonna ask them in the chat, or just say it
Yeah,
out
go
loud?
ahead.
Do you want, okay. I was just gonna see if you guys had any ideas about what SDI would you use with this specific student with the scenario. We know it's not perfect, like Matt said, we need data, hard facts. But what kind of SDI do you think, what would the priorities would you be with Jose? What part of reading do you think that you would work on, and what SDI do you think he would need? Before I answer, I'll let them try. For Katie.
Right, data or it didn't happen. Yeah, I think that listening comprehension is a good thing to dive into. What's his skill set look like there? How does he respond to comprehension questions and that? Because that could then lead us to some discussions around accommodations, because that's one of the issues that we have to and yeah, wow, you guys are great. Keep coming. You know, graphic organizers, sequencing of events, taking it away from the text and putting it into different frameworks so the student can maybe see what's going on in the story and connect what he's reading to the visual process. That might be a huge thing for them, or having them being able to, and maybe what I don't know about this particular student is their written expression skills. How good are those? Can they, because it looks like here we're asking students to write answers. What happens if we just talk about it? Or can you describe them? Can you draw a picture of what happened? What's the big idea in this story? Can you draw a picture of it? Or is it not there? Is there something else going on? So yeah, looking at those different ways of, and some of those are accommodations as well. Just don't get me wrong, but that has to do with the different ways of instructing the student as well. We're going to add these components with the regular instruction to see if that improves their outcomes. So we're going to make sure they get that. And yeah, level of language. Well, we don't know. It doesn't really mention ELL concerns in this process, I don't think, so we don't know how fluent the student might be. That's always a concern as we're looking in different settings. Yeah, I like those different pieces. And I think a lot of us would have, well, you know, one of the things that I run into with these kind of things, yeah, that's a good question, well, first of all, is he an ELL student? We don't know that in this scenario. But I do think a lot of times this is scenario, even though it's a nice read, this is what we get for move-ins a lot of times. There's not a lot of data there. So what do we do right away? We have to do our screeners. We have to do our quick tests and observations to see if we can check. Yeah. And Absolutely. And, you know, and understanding, I was writing some things about this today, just thinking through, knowing the student. What do we know about the student? And like you said here already, the student's on the third school, and it's April of that particular school year, and it's their third school. So they've missed things, and that's broken their instruction over those transitions. So one school could be ahead of the other or behind the other, and what's he missed, and what's he missing out on, in whole or in part? What do I know about him? And the more we understand the student's experience and their community experience, we might be able to activate that prior knowledge piece. Because that's such a big thing with reading. The more I read about that and that science of reading piece, that's such a big event. You know, if we don't have the hooks to hang it on, I'm not going to retain that content. You know, if I don't know what a ship looks like, or what sails are, or what's the point of me reading a story about that if I don't know what it's supposed to look like? I've never seen one before, much less interacted with something like that. So how can I comprehend those things? I don't know what any of those words mean, or that concept. I might even be able to code the whole thing and understand the individual words, but the concept it describes might be something I've never encountered before. So we have to kind of think about that. And that's that. Yeah, there's a lot. You guys all have really good questions. Those are a lot of the same things that we started to ask as we started looking at these different scenarios, because and I really think that it's worth your time to develop that little arsenal of quick screening tools, looking at reading, looking at comprehension, so you can get going with the student, because we don't want to wait. When we have that move-in process, we don't have much time to get started with them, and we want to do it right. We don't want to waste their time or their time. Right, the time is so short. And really, it's not that long with any of our students, and that's why it's important. As soon as we know something better, we need to do the better thing. And that's, when we talk about specialty design instruction, the thing we haven't really mentioned much is the idea of progress monitoring, keeping track of how the student's improving and the progress they're making. So if they're not making the progress we expect, we can make a quick change. And I think, moving on, and I appreciate your interaction with all these pieces, but I think I wanted to make sure we kind of tie things up a little bit today before we move on here. So, we do have to find a balance within this process that, we want our students to move toward those standards as much as possible, but we do have to address their unique learning needs along the way. We have to understand their barriers, or they're never going to reach those standards that we've set for them. So we have to bridge that gap whenever possible, move them along that pathway as much as we can. And I know we all three said it, and I know you've all heard this from other folks before. This is the heart of special education. It's what makes it unique and what makes it special. So we have to do this carefully. We have to be faithful in our implementation, which I think we get tired of hearing the word fidelity when we start talking about education, but all it is doing what we say we're going to do. As we planned it, so it happens. When the IEP is written, that's what we do. And we just have to keep track of things. Is this working? Is it not? We don't want to spend any time on interventions that don't work, that aren't effective for a student. As soon as we know different, we do our best to make a change. So that comes down to frequent and consistent planning and progress monitoring, and that cycle of the process. Because I think Alana talked about it with that implementation of special design instruction. It's not that cyclical process is special education in a nutshell. It's as we know differently, we feed that data back into the system and we do something different. As the more and better information we have, the better and more functional our instruction can be. So those are, well, I don't know. Didn't plan to say all that. I got on the soapbox there for a second, but anything to add or questions that we have? I know we've got a little bit of a wrap up here.
I love all your guys' chat. I just appreciate you guys talking with each other, giving each other, collaborating with each other, because we know it's a shared responsibility. So working out with one team might be working well with another. So I appreciate that, and the comments when we were all talking. that's just what I have to say for that part.
Okay, so Katie, did you have anything you wanted to add? I just want to make sure we all have a chance to wrap up if you wanted to.
I'm good. I just want to thank everyone for their time today, because I know being after school and sitting on a webinar for 90 minutes is pretty hard. So thank you so much. And if you have questions, Matt will show you our contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I feel like we had to go so quickly through this. Oh, spring break. Yes.
Oh, that you're on spring break and you're enjoying our company today. I can't imagine a more wonderful thing to do on spring break than to spend time with us talking about special design instruction. So I really appreciate you doing that today. That's really, really something. And yeah, I think that's one of the core attributes of anybody in education. If you've been in it for a long time, especially design spring break, that's funny. Is that love of learning, because we're always looking to learn more and get better at what we do and find ways to reach, I mean, each one of those students that we can't quite get to motivates you to learn that next thing. Next time I'm going to be ready for when that happens. Next time I'm going to be prepared.
Hey, Matt, will you put the eval so that they can do that before they
Yep,
go?
I'm going to
fast?
switch to that real quick, and then we'll put it up in the chat.
Sorry,
also.
I know so at my house it's 4:28 because I live in the central time zone, but they are 5:28, so they're at dinner over there.
I'll type it in the chat also.
I put it in there, Matt.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
Wonderful. I just can't read while I'm typing, apparently. So that's a link Katie put in there for you. If you copy and paste that link, you can do an evaluation. Just make sure, look for today's date and our names, and you'll see several prompts. And we really appreciate your feedback in those events. That always helps us improve our process. So we really appreciate that. Please, if you haven't, I know just the fact that you've been here means you visited our website before. It's always changing. There's always new information there. So please take the time to check us out there at iepta.org. And I will also put up here, lastly, this is our contact information. The full presentation is in the Padlet as well. So if you didn't get all this, the way that Katie put the link in there, you have to copy and paste it into your browser.